Hello everyone, this is strategy session, and today I'm going to talk about the deferred Steinitz and the strategic ideas that we can find there. To understand this system, I chose 4 world champions, and the 5th one will be the system that we're talking about. In fact, it's going to be very interesting because these world champions have similar ideas of handling this system, but it's different. They tweak it a little bit. So the first one I want to show is between Alekhine against Joner. Well, Joner is not well known, and I don't know him. But the way Alekhine handles this position is very important to note. So e4, e5, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, d6. This is the deferred Steinitz. It's not as popular as it was in the 80s and 90s. In the past, many people castled. Actually, there's castling here. Instead of knight f6, bishop g4 was very popular, with the idea of h3, h5, kind of stopping or deterring white from taking on g4. But the classical Steinitz is to eventually put the bishop on d7 and just keep developing with black. So d4, bishop e7. Now, obviously the first question is if we can win a pawn. We can't win a pawn right now, because if we take, d takes e5, black just takes the pawn back with knight takes e4. And this is just very comfortable for black, as all these bishops are just putting enormous pressure on Alekhine's position. So Alekhine decides to play d5, knight b8, and bishop c2. Now, this is my first question to the class. What does this position remind you of? What is this similar to? Can you raise your hand? Yeah? Yeah, definitely. It looks much like the King's Indian. One of the big differences being that this bishop on e7 is awful. It doesn't really do anything there, and it should be on g7 instead. So Alekhine has a choice here, either to take on d7 or play bishop c2. And when we're trying to think strategically, we have to take a look which one is better. We have to look at the pros and cons. Can anybody tell me what's the pros of keeping the bishop and moving it to c2? Yeah? Well, it is wasting a move, but it would still get rid of that white squared bishop. But you had a good point saying with bishop c2, in the long run, white might have ideas attacking. Well, maybe not even on h7, but at least taking away and putting pressure on this important square on f5. But bishop takes d7 also has some strategic ideas behind it. Can anybody tell me what could be the potential pros of bishop takes d7? Yeah. Yes, so the bishop on d7 is pretty good for black. So black would like to keep it if possible. On the other hand, we're exchanging off one of our assets, the a4 bishop. So it's around 50-50, whichever you feel like. Both is reasonable, but it's not quite easy to decide which one is best. Alekhine chose bishop c2. That's one thing. It plans some attacks in the near future, in the upcoming future, while also defending the e4 pawn. Bishop g4. I'm not a big fan of bishop g4. The reason is I don't like this move is black commits this bishop way too early. If black would castle, not king f8, castle, black we'll have a choice then. If white would say play h3, already white wasted the tempo, so we don't have to go bishop g4, which would be a bad idea right now, because they'll just take us. But bishop g4 is not too good, because Alekhine already knows what black is planning. c4, gaining some space, and also planning knight c3, knight d7, h3. And this is the main problem. Alekhine is asking a question way earlier than black could decide if it's good to take or not good enough to take. Because in this position, black would like to have a bishop on c8 and decide later on if he's going to bring the bishop on the king side or keep it on c8 for an attacking possibility. He played bishop g4 way too early, and after knight d7, h3, he has to make an uncomfortable choice. So he decides to keep the bishop. Well, if he takes on f3, the problem is that white gets the bishop pair for not much. These bishops will be extremely powerful, and also white loses one of its best pieces. Bishop h5, knight c3, castle, g4, bishop g6. All right, because we're talking about strategy, let's take stock. Who's better and why? Any ideas? Yeah, the black is not really developed. And also, what about the black pieces? What can we say about them? Yeah, black pieces are kind of passive, but we have to pinpoint which pieces are very bad in black's position. Yes. Yes, basically this bishop on g6 is terrible. And even though e7 is bad, but you can't do much with it. This bishop on g6 is hopeless. In general, black might go knight e8 and bishop g5 if given the chance. And there's a hope for this bishop to get better. But this bishop is stuck on g6 forever. Correct. So we could state that Alekhine just outplayed his opponent already. Queen e2, knight e8. Joner just follows the plan that I just mentioned. He's trying to get rid of that bishop on e7. Bishop d2, h6, king g2. Now, king g2 is this typical human move that I really like. It's this idea of not showing the true intentions. But still, let's think about it. What is Alekhine preparing with king g2? Yes?
The possibility of swinging the rooks over to the king side.
Yeah.
Just pushing the pawns.
Yeah. So, yes. So king g2 is a great move because it's ambiguous. It doesn't show any true intentions. White might still go on and play on the queen side, but it also hints at ideas at rook h1, h4, g5. And if white manages to crash through on the king side, it'll be over. It'll be checkmate. Bishop h7, rook h1, g5. So black chooses a plan that usually is not good because he closes off the position and hopes that he won't get checkmated. But that usually doesn't work. You have to stay passive and defend a closed position. You can't totally close it off because you will have no counterplay at all. So Alekhine played h4, f6, knight d1. Where is that knight headed? Yep. F5. F5, of course. Knight is going to f5. Knight e3, knight f5. But as we will see, Alekhine is not in a big rush. He knows that sooner or later he's going to crash through. So he's very patient. Rook f7, knight e3, knight f8, knight f5. Why was knight f5 very important in this moment? Actually, a very crucial moment. Yes. 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 So knight g6 is a threat for black. And if he manages to get there, it will jump to f4. And, oh, nope. So knight f8, and the plan will be to go to f4 and knight f4, and occupying this important square on f4. And if black manages to do that, it's getting unclear. So therefore, Alekhine plays knight f5, takes, and now this all-important g6 square is protected. So the first thing first, Alekhine pushed his opponent off the board and then stopped him from having any counterplay at all. So g takes f5, rook h7, rook g1, knight g7, king f1. Can we pinpoint what Alekhine is playing for at the moment? Obviously, he wants to crash through, but Alekhine just brings his pieces, as we see that, but he doesn't show his true intentions. Black is still guessing what white wants to do. We don't know what white wants. It could be about anything. Because the only thing we know at the moment that the rooks are on these two half-open files. They have very nice pressure on those pawns, but we don't know what Alekhine's real plan is. And that's a good thing. The more ambiguously play in these strategic positions, the hardest for your opponent to decide how to defend. So queen e8, knight h2. Now Alekhine is revealing something. He's kind of planning of jumping to g4 and hitting these vital spots on h6 and f6. Knight h5, hoping to go to f4, but it's not as good as it was before. Knight g4, knight f4, queen f3. Now, how many good pieces does black have? One, and that's not enough. So, therefore, it's clear that white is much, much better, if not near winning. King g7, h takes g5 takes, rook h1. Now, if you notice it, Alekhine exchanges off the only potentially active piece, and that was the rook on h7. And now, after he got rid of that good piece, he attacks this terrible piece on h7. King h8. He plays king h8 because white is threatening ideas of bishop f4 and queen h3, and then invading. So king h8, rook h6. Now notice that Alekhine doesn't want to force action. He wants his opponent to keep guessing what he's up to. He doesn't take on f4 immediately. He'll choose just the right moment when to take. Queen f7, bishop d1. What's the idea of bishop d1? I know it's a mysterious move, but what could it be? Yeah. Yes. Yes. So basically the idea, as you correctly pointed out, is to take on f4 at some opportune moment and in fact transfer this bishop after long, long maneuvering to h5 and g6. And then it's going to be made correct. Yeah, so bishop d1, that's the main idea of this move. Rook g8, queen b3. Now, queen b3 is a typical Alekhine move. He dominated the king side, so he turns his attention to the queen side, which is very typical of him and one of his biggest assets in his chess. b6. Now he took, no he didn't, bishop f8. He took on a6. There's no taking because knight takes h6, and that's what happened. Queen c8. And coming back just for a second, in this position, already black is in big trouble, because if he plays a5, I attack you from the sides, and I will have double threats, winning the c7 pawn, while you're still kind of stuck defending on the king side. So therefore, Joner decides to find some other way of finding a counterplay, but he still fails. Knight f8, bishop takes f4, he takes f4. Now, I really like this move by Alekhine, bishop takes f4, because he's exchanging as much as he can when he's a pawn up. And that's very important to note. When you have a winning position, exchanges are good for you. Obviously, don't exchange the whole board off, but if you keep enough material on the board, exchanges should favor you. Queen e8, another very nice move, just taking away all the squares from the black queen. So it's kind of stuck there. g4, queen h5, just attacking these weak pawns. f3, bishop a4, knight h7, bishop c2. Well, Alekhine is not doing much now. He's just waiting. Knight f8, and he plays e5. D takes e5, and here Alekhine finds a very, very classy way of winning the position. d6. The same idea as you had, sir. The bishop wants to enter through d5. Now, Joner played c5, and after bishop e4, he resigned, as either the d pawn promotes or the bishop just checkmates on d5. It was very important, though, to play d6 first, because this is the most forcing way to win. If c takes d6, white can even play this move of c5, because nobody can take the pawn, because I just check you and I win, because this threat is just way too strong. Otherwise, I can just take the pawn and just be winning. Or even bishop b3 is a win. So that was one way of handling this Steinitz Deferred, of not taking on d7. So that was our first world champion who played against this system in this lecture. Let's see Karpov's way of handling this. So it's e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, g6. Now, this is a different move order, but it will transpose to these typical Steinitz positions. c3, a6, bishop a4, d6. And here we are in Steinitz territory. d4, bishop d7, castle, bishop g7. Now, the best way to learn strategies is to think about the position and come up with original ideas. So we already have one plan. What was the plan that we first learned? Yeah?
Play d5.
Play d5, of course. But let's look at this position and let's come up with some other plans. Because that's not the only plan you can play in this type of positions. Maybe you can find Karpov's plan. Yeah, bishop g5 is a very good idea. Yes? So you were suggesting the move h3 and with the plans of g4. h3 is a good move, usually because you would take away this g4 square from the bishop. So that's great. But always be wary with the g4 ideas. This g4 ideas, as we saw from the previous game in the Alekhine game, was good because the bishop was already on h5. If the bishop doesn't move to h5, g4 is not such a good idea. Okay? So bishop g5 is a very, very good idea. It's not what Karpov played, but it's a good way, kind of you anticipated what black is going to do. And if the knight moves to f6, it runs into a pin, and we're just happy about that. Or knight e7. So bishop g5 is actually one of the favorites of Viswanathan Anand, the world champion, who just recently won the Rapid World Championship. He also likes this move of bothering the black queen. But actually, black has a funny move here that Ben Feingold would hate to see, and that's f6. Now, the reason f6 could work in this position is that the knight on g8 is not developed yet, and strangely enough, in closed position, being undeveloped has its perks. For example, bishop e3. Now black has this crazy little move called knight h6. And if the bishop moves to b3, black will go queen e7, knight d2, and knight f7. basically building a shelter so he can castle kingside. Very interesting play. I'm not saying black is equalizing, but it's actually very interesting. Nigel Short still plays this line with black, so it shouldn't be too bad. But your strategic idea of bishop g5 and then developing your pieces, that's a very good idea. Karpov, as he's more of a classicist, likes to develop all his pieces classically, played rook e1, knight e7, and put his bishop to e3. Now we're going to see a different method of playing against this d6 e5 structure. Karpov says, I have the bigger center, therefore I should be better here. And that is why he decides not to close the center and just play for the space advantage. Knight d2, queen e8. Actually, this queen e8 is quite a nasty move. What does Spassky have in mind? What is he planning to do next? Yeah, knight takes d4. So if I'm unsuspecting and play h3, then boom, knight d4. And bishop d7 usually would win, but the problem is knight takes f3 is check. And we would be a pawn down, and that won't be a fun game afterwards. So Karpov doesn't fall for cheap tricks. He plays bishop b3. Just as I mentioned before, this bishop is very powerful on this diagonal and is most of the times very happily placed there. Now, Karpov has another threat that Spassky will deal with in the upcoming move. Karpov wants to take, and if takes, then bishop c5, putting pressure on the e7 square. Let me show you how. So bishop b3, if king h8, d takes e5, d takes, and bishop c5. And b6 is not enough, because I'm obviously not going to take on e7. I'm going to play bishop a3. And then I'll have nasty, nasty threats along these two diagonals. Also, I have a little bit more space, because this bishop on d7 is kind of cramped. D7 and the knight on e7 is a bit cramped. So Spassky comes up with a good defensive move, namely b6, stopping that idea for good. D takes e5, d takes e5. And there's one big difference when we play this classical way compared to the d5 way of playing, which looks more like a King's Indian, that in this case, black will be risking something if he plans to play f5. Obviously, it's not legal now, but later on we'll see how risky it is to play for that. Knight c4, hitting the e5 pawn immediately, which is defended at the moment, but that only means that the knight on c6 can't move at all. King h8, queen c1. All right, so what's our first impression of this position? Yeah, so yeah, it is close to equal, but white has some little bit of a pull. Any other ideas about the position?
Bishop to h6, and you've got a direct threat to the bishop and the rook.
Yeah, bishop h6 is a very big threat, and actually Karpov is playing for that, trying to undermine this e5 pawn. So Spassky, seeing that, could come up with two options. One of the options that he has is not Ben Feingold's favorite. What move is that? Yes, f6. Now, Spassky didn't know that Ben hates that move, so maybe that's why he didn't play it. Oh, yeah. If he would have known that, maybe he would have played it. But f6, paradoxically, would have been a pretty good move, because, for one, it defends the e5 pawn. Two, black can hope for a King's Indian kind of play. Can anybody guess what plan Spassky can build in this position? It kind of looks weird for the untrained eye, but it would be pretty strong here. What plan could black have in this position? Yes?
G5, Queen H5.
G5. I'm not sure about Queen H5. The G5 move is pretty good. So let's say H3. Let's make some moves. G5. And what plan could black have in mind in this position?
Knight G6, Knight F4.
Yes, Knight G6, Knight F4. And actually this is a very, very strong plan. Just molding and just finding that outpost for the knight. And that would be amazing for black, because this E7 knight is not too happy on E7 and would just have a ball if it reaches F4. So F6 would have been the best move here, even though it's a tough move to make, because that would close this bishop on G7 forever. So he played bishop G4, and now Karpov played a very interesting idea, knight G5. Seemingly a weird move, and I guess Spassky was asking that question, what are you going to do with that after H6? But Karpov had an idea in mind. So it's white to move and solve kind of the issue of the knight. It's more of a strategic idea, it's not too tactical. Obviously, white doesn't want to bring the knight back, because then we'll have very bad pawn structure. Yes?
H3 or
Yes, H3. Well, F3 is not good, because he just moved the bishop, and then you'll have to move the knight. I'll take you, and then you'll have this very, very sad structure that we don't like. Also, this F3 pawn will be very weak. So H3, that's the correct move, as you suggested. And I think this surprised Spassky, because the knight will have a very nice place on F3, and black is just losing tempi everywhere. Bishop D7, knight F3, king H7. And now this is still the slow maneuvering game. I still feel white is slightly better, and black is kind of suffocated because of all these passive pieces on the queen side, namely C6, D7, and E7 pieces. A4. Now A4 is kind of gaining a little bit of space while also taking away this idea of B5. So he plays F5. And this is the thing I was talking about. F5 in these half-open positions are not such a great idea, because I take, of course, because I want to open up the position. If black would manage to play F4, he'd have an amazing attack with G5, H5, and all those King's Indian shenanigans. So E takes F5, G takes F5, and here Karpov played a very, very nice tactical idea. Yes?
Could he take on E5?
Yes. Knight takes E5. Knight takes E5, takes, bishop H6. And this is actually very typical. Sometimes, even in the classical King's Indian, you get these half-open structures, and typically there are these kind of sacrifices with knight E5. The problem here for black is that there's no bishop G7, because queen G5, but I can just take immediately, and queen G5, that's maybe even easier. And now the rook will just take on E7, and I'm just winning. Now the biggest problem for black is that even though he'll be some material up, all his pieces are so discoordinated that he's just inadvertently going to be worse. So he played bishop D6, queen G5. just putting a lot of threat and just threatening queen g7 here. Queen g6, rook e7, takes, king takes h6, queen takes d7. And now let's take stock. How do we stand material-wise in this position with white? Hmm?
It's about equal material. It's damage change the 2 points.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say equal. I mean equal material-wise, that's true. But what's better for white? Yeah, the black's position, it's very, very important. This king on h6 is without shelter. Meanwhile, Karpov's king is very safe on g1, with all these healthy pawns defending it. f4, well, Spassky is trying to find some counter chances, but Karpov is not scared of anything. And f3 wouldn't scare him because he'd either play g4, and the king will come up with king h2 and queen g3. And now it's already 3 pawns, so that's more than enough. In general, I'd say that white is better because of the king safety. And also, usually if you have 2 pawns and a piece, that should be more than enough to compensate the material deficit. Rook a8, rook d1. What's the plan of rook d1? Yes?
Rook D7 or D6?
Yeah, rook d7 or rook d6. But the good thing here too, that we just activated all of our pieces. The queen, the bishop, the rook are very active. And that's very good compared to black's position where the most active piece is this queen on g6. So we can safely state that white is much, much better. Rook f6, king h2. Just getting out of these tricks of f3. So king h2, a5, rook d4. Just trying to gobble a little bit more pawns with the idea of rook f4, rook f8, rook d7, rook c6, queen e5, queen f6, queen d5, rook c5, queen e4. And Spassky had enough. Because if queen g6 is played, we would have a very, very nice move here with white, which is kind of easy, but still need to find it. It's white to move and gain a decisive attack. Yeah?
Queen E7.
Yeah, queen e7. And now the problem is, for one, I'm hitting on your rook. The other problem is if, let's say, rook f6, you have a very nice little intermezzo in this position. Yeah, bishop to c2, and you can't defend both the h7 square and the rook, so you're basically lost. So if you take, queen takes f6, and I'm winning. So Karpov's way of playing was much different to Alekhine's. He was more focusing on keeping his strategic advantage of center and just slowly grind it away. Alekhine was more of combining positional play with an aggressive attack. So we saw 2 games from these world champions. Let's see how computers handle this position. In fact, one of them is a world champion. Yes. So this game is played between Komodo and Houdini, and they're playing this position. And this is kind of very similar to the positions we saw. g6, bishop e3, very close to the way that Karpov played. Bishop g7, d5. But this is kind of a bit strange, or for a human, not too logical. Because as we saw, when Alekhine played d5, he didn't play bishop e3 necessarily. If white played bishop e3, usually he continued with knight d2 and rook e1. It doesn't mean that white's plan is bad. It's just unusual for the human eye. d5, knight b8, c4. So what is white going for here? What's our first guess?
Pushing the center of the board.
Yeah, pushing, getting that advantage in the board.
It's like King's Indian.
Yeah. White is, yeah.
Also opened up the c3 square for his knight.
Yeah. So white is going for the space advantage and for some type of King's Indian positions, where this bishop is a little bit misplaced on d7. Castles, takes, knight c3. Okay, so this is very reasonable. White has this extra space with the c4, e4 pawn structure. But black still has fighting chances because black is already developed and everything is ready for an attack. Especially the idea of playing f5 is just on the table. So h6. Before f5, he must play h6. Because if he plays f5 right now, I have a very typical idea, and that is knight g5. And the knight would hop in to e6, e6, and that would be terrible. So he plays h6, knight d2, f5, f3. Now, compared to King's Indian, what can we say about this position? What's the difference here? Yeah, the bishops are missing. Is that good for black? Yeah, it's bad for black. So usually this should favor white, and as we will see, it does. On the other hand, black is very well developed. The pieces, the knight on d7 and e7 is very well placed at the moment because they're ready to support any kind of king side or queen side action that could happen. So black has some chances here. King h7, queen b3. Now queen b3, I'm not fond of. This is the typical computer move, which looks nice at first sight and might even be the strongest move. But if we look forward in time, we might realize that we'd rather have this queen on c2 rather than on b3 or even on e2. Now, I'm not saying that queen b3 is bad. It's just not part of a larger plan that usually humans aim for. So queen b8, which is also a little bit weird. I'd prefer b6 because black could keep this structure. This is very King's Indian-like. But queen b8 is fine too. Bishop f2, h5, rook d1. Why did white play rook f d1? It's a pretty good move. Yes?
Knight f1, knight
Yeah, it's preparing knight maneuvers with knight f1, but it also prepares the defense of the d2 knight. So that's important. Bishop h6. So actually Komodo thought correctly that bishop h6 is coming. a4, c5, a5. I like this plan. This a4, a5 plan is very good. What could be the long-term benefit of having this a4, a5 idea in this structure? Yes. So white will eventually play ideas like b4. Let's say queen c2, queen c7, queen c2. And now we understand why we wanted the queen on c2 originally, because white was forced to make the move queen c2 anyways. And again, this is kind of preparing the idea of b4, mostly after this preparatory move of rook d1, rook d, b1, and b4. So rook b8, king h1, b6. A takes, rook takes b6, rook b1, knight f6, bishop e1. Now, would it favor black to take on e4 or not? That's my question. From a strategical point of view, would that be a great idea to take on e4?
So I can end up down in position.
Yes?
probably not. He should
Why
play
not?
f1 kind of gives him some edge. Play g5, g4.
So you're saying that if we keep the pawn, we have g5, g4 ideas. Yeah. But what's wrong with the idea of taking on e4? What does that allow for white?
It's an outpost.
Yeah, we get an outpost. Yeah.
C3 to D4 or to E4.
Yeah. C takes to e4, takes, and now white would have a brilliant strategic position, as this knight is powerful here, and we're also kind of getting very close to break with b4. So this is basically strategically winning. Yes, what?
Bishop A5.
Yeah, but it's black to move.
It's not possible for black to play like knight f5, knight e4.
Yeah, knight f5, knight d4 would be an idea for black, but then bishop a5 would come. So that's kind of the tactical problem with black's position. Therefore, Houdini doesn't take on e4, which is a good strategic decision, and plays king g7, rook a3, queen c8, rook a1. White is preparing to assault that a6 pawn. Rook f7, bishop f2, queen b8. Well, it seems that black is kind of waiting, not doing too much. Although I don't know what bishop f2 wants exactly, but it's never too bad to put up this battery, and that might be useful later on. Queen b8. The computer will not blunder the b2 pawn. King h7, bishop e1, king g7, h3. So they've been waiting around for a while now. Queen c8, queen d3. Mind you, white wouldn't take on a6 because the b2 pawn would be hanging, and that would have been a bad trade for white, so he never takes on a6. And after h3, Houdini decides to defend the a6 pawn anyways. Queen d3, king h7, king g1. And to be honest, I don't see concrete plans for either side much, or they're not showing any signs of plans at the moment. Knight d7. Now, knight d7 is a committal decision by black, because knight d7 comes, then black loses the grip on the e4 pawn. And even though black never takes on e4, it's one of those important squares in these type of positions. Because if white doesn't have enough defenses on e4, it's most probably going to be a good position for black. But white also needs to defend that pawn. And I guess that's the reason why there was this shadow fighting between the two computers. Neither of them wanted to release the tension. Okay, but now Houdini gave in and played knight d7, planning to regroup or do something. Queen e2, knight g8, and here comes the regrouping. He thinks or plans that he'll go knight g8 and knight f6, thinking that the knight will stand much better on f6 than on e7, which will turn out to be false. Knight d1, a very nice plan. Knight f6, knight f2. So white takes the time to maneuver himself or itself and plays knight d3. And this maneuver is very typical of the King's Indian. The knight is very well placed on d3, because this prepares any ideas of sacrificing or just coming up with plans of b4 and c5. So this was a very beneficial maneuver for Komodo, and this was a strong one as well. Knight d7, and now Houdini realized that he can't do anything anyways, and he's just waiting now. King h1. Now this king h1 move is useful. Why is king h1 so useful in this position? Yeah?
Getting out of checks.
Yeah, just getting out of checks. That's all. So anytime if he will start doing some maneuvers with b4 or anything else, he won't be in queen c5 checks, which don't make sense at the moment, but can happen anytime. Also, black has plans of bishop e3, bishop d4 sometimes. So if your king is on h1, that's at least not a check. So king g8 is played, rook a3, king h2, e takes f5, g takes f5, knight f1. And this is a typical way of just destroying a king's Indian structure. White gives up the center, plays knight f1, but for giving away the center, black got weaknesses. Where are those weaknesses at? Yes?
E6 square and H5 pawn. It's not isolated.
Not really the e6 because it's well protected. It's mostly the f5 pawn that it's weak and the h5 pawn. And the problem for black is that he either going to checkmate or lose. Now it's going to be the other case. Black is going to lose. Queen g8, and that drops the pawn. Now, and we'll stop there because the computer will just finish off afterwards. Just keep the pawn and win. The problem was here that white has this very brutal threat of knight g3, double attacking both the f5 and h5 pawns, and there's not much black can do about it. Because if he moves his knight away, I might have b4 ideas, and sooner or later your position crumbles. So after queen g8, rook takes a6, and later on, Komodo won with good technique. But comes game 2, where the sides switch and Houdini plays the white colored. So Houdini is white in this game. d6, c3, d4, knight e7, d5, knight b8. Houdini plays with bishop c2, which is normal. We saw this before, right? Yeah, this is the Alekhine way of handling. Knight g6. And here, Houdini comes up with a novel and very interesting idea. And actually, I think we can find it if we can pinpoint where's black's biggest weakness in this position. Which square is relatively weak in this position? This bishop on c2 is very useful right now because it supports this pawn. The pawn that has a firm grip on the square we're really hoping to use. Yes, the f5 square. So Houdini comes up with this very, very interesting idea of knight a3, which is by no means very human. Houdini, yeah, he is planning to move around and go to f5. So this is a very, very concrete way of attacking this position, saying that, oh, I'm going to go through this route and this will be amazing. And what's fascinating about this, that black can't really do much about it. Because if he plays b5, which would be the first human reaction, stopping white from going there, then white would just jump back. And the idea would be to play a4. And compared to these King's Indian positions, white has a ready-made attack on the queen side. So it's quite possible that Houdini just found the best move in this position. Bishop e7, knight c4, a5. I'm not sure about a5 because white is not really planning to go knight a5. It's not a real threat. a5, but okay, a5 is a normal move. g3. Now, can anybody tell me what's the idea of g3?
G6.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons is to just smother this knight on g6, also using this idea of h4, h5. But mostly taking away this f4 square because it's pivotal. h6, knight e3. Houdini is going for his plan. Knight f8. Knight f8 I don't like because it's a plan that will not do much. I think black should castle and hope for the best, but I think white is already much, much better. Knight f8, a4, just stopping any ideas of advancing the pawn. a4, knight h7, b3, just defending. Knight f6. And now, the reason I don't like this maneuver, that black managed to bring the knight to f6 that you could do in one move. Now he wasted like 3 moves on it. So it could have been the best move in the position, but it still feels a bit off. Knight d2, very good plan. Bishop h3, because white is planning to play Alekhine-like and go crazy on the king side. Bishop h3, queen e2, h5, bishop a3, just getting ready to castle and develop. Knight d7, f3. Now the idea is to take away this g4 square. g6, and here Houdini comes up with another very nice maneuver, as he gets rid of the only active piece that black has. If we go g4, he'll take it. We do lock the bishop, but we give some space for our opponent. We don't want to do that. Yeah? Yes. Knight d1 and knight f2. So Houdini is showing very nice maneuvers in this position. Knight b6, knight f2, bishop c8, castles. And we can see, just by looking at this position, that this is amazing for white. He has the center. He has everything ready for a kingside attack. Meanwhile, black is struggling in developing pieces. Knight d7, another sad move that we don't really want to make. f4, and after b6, knight f3, just bringing more pieces into the game. Castle, f5, and f5 is a very good move. It's kind of signaling that, okay, we're going to play for 2 results now. Either I'm going to win or we're going to draw. If you fight really well, maybe you draw. But these are computers, so it's not likely to happen. King g7, king b1, rook h8, h3. And the reason why I'm saying that white has so much initiative going on and so many good pieces attacking, it's unlikely it'll end in a draw. Knight h7. How can we bring in some more pieces to attack? Yeah?
Bishop C1.
Yeah, bishop c1. Just putting some pressure on g5, which is an important square. If black could manage to set foot there, he could hope maybe to draw somehow. Bishop c1, bishop a6, c4. Black tries to do something on the queen's side, but after c4, it's all closed down. There's nothing going to happen there. g5, rook f1, knight h f8, h, knight h2, rook h7, h4, g4, and Houdini comes up with the most powerful plan possible here. Yes?
Knight h takes
Yes.
g4.
Knight g4. It's time to sacrifice for the initiative. And this kind of reminds me of the game played between Wesley So and Kamsky, where you have these positional piece sacrifices. You'll have just so many pieces attacking your opponent's king, there's no way your opponent can survive, and Komodo will not survive. Knight takes g4, especially as these pawns will start marching and there's no stopping them. King h8, rook g1, rook c8, knight h6, g4, g5. And even if Komodo would give back some material, that won't be enough, because my rooks will just double on the g line and I'm just going to crash through. Queen f8 takes, knight g4, exchanging off that healthy defender. knight g8, f6, bishop d8, h5, stingy, not giving the pawn away, rook b8, rook g3, and then Komodo decided to resign. A very well played game by Houdini, and actually that knight a3 plan was very exciting and novel compared to the other games. So last but not least, I want to show the fourth world champion, and that is Anand against Malaniuk. Anand, who's still in his prime or getting back there as he just won the Rapid World Championship, was a very good player in the 90s already. And this is one of his very good games that he played at that time. Same variation, the Steinitz, d4, g6, bishop e3, bishop g7, d5. So he plays the same way as we saw from the computers, knight b8, c4. And Anand seems to like the idea of also having a center. Knight f6. So now this is going to be different. The games we saw was mostly knight e7. Knight f6, knight c3, castle, takes, knight d2. So this is a slightly worse version for black, as this knight is not too well placed here. Most likely the knight should be on e7 as shown in the computer game. c6, castle, rook c8, queen e2, rook c7, and now Anand plays a move that we've seen before. It's pretty good. It's a very nice conceptual move. Yes? No, c5 would lose a pawn. So he played rook fd1. Just defending this knight on d2, also hinting at ideas later on if time comes and it's needed. C takes d5. How should we take back? Yes, c takes d5. Because if we take e takes d5, this pawn can become a little bit weak on c4. And black will have a real threat of marching with f5, f4, and it's very double-edged. So c takes d5 is clearly the best. b5, knight c4 was threatened, so black stops that. f3, just bolstering the center on e4. And the e4 pawn, queen b8. How can we break through on the queen side? Yeah, a4, of course. Just pointing out that this b5 pawn is very weak with the a6 pawn. But black is forced to play b4, knight a2. And now black has big problems as this knight is going to jump to c4. So Malaniuk looks for some other counter chances with knight c5. But here, Anand comes up with a very nice practical decision. It's white to move and get the advantage. Yeah. Anand decided that even though the bishop is very powerful, it's worth the pawns. So we'll just get those pawns then. Rook c5, knight b3.
Why not?
Just winning that extra tempi, because the a6 pawn is going to drop anyways. Queen takes a6, bishop h6, and now comes the counter chance. And this is a sign of a grandmaster. He takes every chance he gets to bring in pieces that could create counterplay. Knight a5, but sadly for him, this knight will jump to c6, and after it arrives there, all counterplay is gone. You'll have some checks with this rook, but it won't be enough. Queen c7, knight b4. So technically white is 2 pawns up, but he's going to lose the b2 one. Rook b1. Exchanging of that pesky rook on b2. Check, king h1. Takes. Knight d7, knight d3. King g7, queen b7. And now black is utterly lost because he will have to exchange the queens. Takes, a5. And black, for good reason, resigned because there's no real way of stopping the plan of a6 and Rook b7, a7. Therefore, Anand won. So, I don't know if you guessed it, but Houdini was 2017's strongest computer. So it was the strongest computer, meaning Houdini was the world champion of 2017. Anand is a past world champion. And the other two was Karpov and Alekhine.